Hello and welcome. Today we're going to look at something called an examiner report. Now, this came out in June 2019 after the June 2019 exam, which was the last external exam that was done in this subject. There's obviously a new one in a couple of days at the time of recording this, November. Good luck with that if you're taking it. It's worth going through this because it gives quite a few hints and tips about how to answer some of the questions and where students went wrong. And the chief examiner wrote this, who's the head of all the examiners, all the people that look at all the exam scripts that come in internationally, and they summed up everything that they found, and we've got some model answers here. This links to the paper one, so I'm linking above to paper one, the video on paper one. This kind of complements it, and we'll start off with question one here. Question 1. Kiki buys a smartphone. The smartphone uses a sensor that detects movement of the device. One way in which the smartphone uses data is to switch itself off when it is dropped. Give two other ways in which the smartphone could use data from the sensor. Now, the model answer I've got here is, could have been used to track the steps done by a user, a pedometer. Could have been used as a compass. She can find the direction, north, west, south, east. And that gained 2 marks, according to the examiner, for 2 discrete responses, so 2 individual responses. Now, the examiner says many candidates failed to gain marks as they talked about the use of other sensors in the mobile phone and did not focus on the movement sensor. You were asked to write about the movement sensor, so not the light sensor, not the sound sensor, or anything like that. There were a lot of answers that mentioned the variation in brightness of the screen and others that talked about temperature sensors. That did not gain marks there, so you could have written a brilliant answer about temperature sensor, but it wouldn't have got any marks. Next question. We're scrolling down. Question 1b. Smartphones can be connected using wired or wireless methods. Give 2 advantages to Kiki of using a wired method to connect to the smartphone. Well, wired is definitely faster and more secure, and this response here explains that, and therefore this response gains both marks available because that is both true. Some answers were a bit vague and talked about the connection being stronger and safer rather than faster and more secure. If you are vague in the exam, you're not going to expect to gain the marks. You need to be really clear about what you want to say. What you want to say for a question like this is it is definitely faster and it's definitely more secure. 1b2. Give 2 advantages to Kiki of using a wireless method to connect to the smartphone. And the response here says definitely more comfortable, easy to move around, cheaper, no need to buy a wire. That gained 2 marks, but more comfortable isn't really saying anything. It is easier to move around. You can work where you want. So more comfortable means you can go and sit where you want and use your device with your wireless method. You don't need to buy wires, but things that didn't gain marks were wires lying around, keeping things tidy. What you need to say instead is that wires lying around can be a health and safety issue, and you can trip on these wires. Now we jump straight to question 1d. A diagram. Kiki meets her friend Zara. Draw a diagram to show how Kiki's smartphone can be used to provide Zara's tablet computer with an internet connection. Label each component and the connectivity using your diagram. Now you're going to get 4 marks here, which is what the answer is. You're going to get 4 marks for the two devices. The tablet, it has to be a tablet and a smartphone, and then 2 marks for the connection. So a 4G tablet to the smartphone and a kind of Bluetooth or similar from the smartphone to the tablet, which provides the internet connection. The tablet connects to the service via a password. 4 marks were awarded. 4G gains 2 marks, 0.12. Third mark is gained as the device is shown to be connected, and the Wi-Fi symbol gains a 4th mark for the connectivity between the devices shown. So that could have been connected using Bluetooth. That is wireless. A wireless, as long as you explain it, is a wireless connection method that gains the marks there. Now, what did the examiner have to say? Not really a lot about that, but you do need to show the connection. So you need to make it clear that you've got 2 devices, that is a smartphone and a tablet, and you need to make it clear what the connection is 1D2. Explain why sharing an internet connection would affect the bandwidth available to Kiki's smartphone. Kiki's smartphone would be much slower when using the internet because she would be sharing it. Now, that only gained 1 mark. Why only 1 mark? Well, because instead of writing sharing it, the student should have be writing sharing the bandwidth instead, to make that really clear. And that would have gained them 2 marks. There was a tendency to repeat the wording of the question, which did not allow the award of the mark. You're not there to rewrite the question. The examiner is perfectly capable of doing that themselves. You're there to answer the question. So make sure you're not just paraphrasing the question, you are actually answering it. Maybe you want to write kind of paraphrase part of it to explain it, but that's all. You don't want to be rewriting the question as your answer. That's not what you're going to gain marks for. 1E. What is 1E? Let's go and have a look at that here. Scroll up a bit there. Kiki's smartphone and Zara's tablets share a lot of the same functionality. Describe the term used for this. The term is convergence, not multifunctional. Multifunctional describes something like a Leatherman. You've got lots of different tools there, screwdriver, kind of knife, different things, bottle opener, etc. What we want, the IT term, is convergence. Be really clear about that. If you didn't write convergence, you weren't gaining the marks for that. Question F. The CPU. Describe the function of a CPU. CPU is there to fetch instructions, decode them, and execute them. FDE. It does that billions of times per second. You're not there to describe it's the brains of the computer. You're not there to describe anything else, other than talking about what it does, which is to fetch an instruction, decode it, and execute it. And it fetches the instruction from RAM. The response gains the first mark for carries out, implies execute, and the second mark for instructions. 2 marks. Fetch the instruction, decode the instruction, execute the instruction, gains your full marks with that answer and that question. 1G, the last question, 2 marks. Second to last question even, penultimate question. Smartphone uses application software. Describe the purpose of application software. Some students got confused with this and said it ran the smartphone. No. That is the operating system. It does not run the smartphone. That is system software that does that. Application software is your Word, Excel, PowerPoint. It allows you to write letters, create spreadsheets, and that's where the student gained marks. So it allows you to write letters, create spreadsheets, etc. So to gain marks there, you need to describe that. H. This is the last question. Explain one benefit of using solid-state storage with the smartphone. Solid-state storage is solid-state drive, which is different to magnetic because it's smaller, thinner, lighter, less noisy. But writing less noisy isn't going to gain you marks there. It doesn't have any moving parts, so it will make less noise. That student only got 1 mark there. Yes, it's correct, it doesn't have any moving parts. But we're not really interested in less noise. What we're interested in is it's more portable because it's lighter, it's got a smaller chassis, it's smaller, it can fit into a very slim smartphone. That's what we're interested with this question. And that completes question 1. Question 2. Zara uses a tablet computer to watch TV online. Describe the function of a router. A router is there to forward data packets between networks. And the model answer we've got here is to store all the IP addresses of all the components so it can forward them. So we're looking at the word forward them with the quickest route to avoid network traffic. Now that answer gained 2 marks. Store IP addresses and forward to the quickest route. Yep, it stores the IP addresses to forward the data packets to the recipient computers, their IP addresses of the recipient computers. And it does do that in the fastest way. But the examiner report says candidates commonly fail to gain marks because they gave a response based on the general colloquial understanding of the term, mistaking it for a wireless access point. It does not provide you with internet access. It's forwarding the data packets. It is not providing you with internet access. It isn't a wireless access point. So just be clear about that. 2B. Let's take 2 benefits to Zara of online TV. She can personalize it to her niche. She has a wide range of selection. She's watching episodes that are available. She can record series, pause, rewind. For this response, the first mark is gained for she had a wide range of selection. The second mark is awarded for can watch it when she wants, as it implies it is always available, which it is. She can pause it and she can rewind it. The examiner says common response included a wider variety of comment and anytime, anywhere. Some responses failed to gain marks as they stated that there was no need for TV to download and reference to streaming, which isn't really appropriate here. 2C. Zara streams an online video. She sees a notice in figure 1. And basically what she's got there is ransomware. Now, the mark for encrypt was often lost when the candidate used the term locked. Most candidates attempted a response but did not gain marks as simply described the 4 stages listed in the image. Ransomware and malware were commonly awarded marks. So you need to use it's ransomware. I'd rather use the word ransomware than malware. The mark for encrypt was often lost when the candidate used the term locked. Use the correct terms, please. Use encrypt. It is encrypted, not locked. Let's make sure we're clear about that. The data is scrambled, so it's more than just locked, it's completely scrambled. So even if you did manage to get into it, you still wouldn't understand what it is because it could be completely scrambled with their own encryption methods. Response mentioning incorrectly farming, phishing, hacking were frequently seen. There's also frequent misunderstandings of trial or subscription having run out, of payment being due. Candidates also gave details of what Zara should do rather than what should happen. So you're not asked what should she do about it. You're asked what has actually happened. And this answer describes that she's been affected with ransomware and that the only way to unscramble that is to make the payment. Or unless she has taken the very sensible response of already having a backup, then it doesn't matter if she has ransomware. That's 4 marks there. Next question, 2D. Give 2 benefits to Zara of connecting her tablet computer to a television. She can watch the video on a larger screen, so it's less straining for her eyes. It's also more convenient. Bigger screen gains a mark. Less straining is enough for a second mark from mark point 3. So that's 2 there. So the student actually got 2 marks for the first response and not really anything for the second. What does it mean it's more convenient? There's nothing really there that's particularly helpful. There's nothing convenient about a television. It's not a particularly great answer. Marks were frequently awarded for mentioning that TV had a bigger screen and had better resolution. So it's all about the resolution and the screen size there. It's not more convenient at all. There's nothing convenient about a TV over a tablet. If anything, the tablet is more convenient than the TV. 2E. Zara uses a PIN to unlock her tablet computer. List 3 other methods she can prevent unauthorized access. Facial recognition, so that's biometrics or finger recognition. Password, biometric scanner, fingerprint there. So 1 mark each was awarded for face recognition and password. Biometric scanner cannot be awarded as the biometric method has already been given. However, on the same line as fingerprint, which is also awarded, so don't mention biometrics twice. Candidates were often able to name more than 3 methods of preventing unauthorized access to the data. However, there are a few responses that included firewall, which is not rewardable. So you're looking at facial recognition, so that's a biometric, password, and you could have as well fingerprint scanner as well, that one, which was awarded another mark there. 2F, explain one advantage of using hosted applications with the tablet computers. One advantage of using hosted applications is that it's being hosted on another device, so it doesn't have to be installed taking up storage. Okay, yes, that was gained 2 marks there. It doesn't have to be installed and doesn't take up storage. So the point there is that you're not using your own storage, using someone else's storage there. That's the advantage. Marks were not awarded for the reference to phone or the concept of accessibility anywhere. So just be aware of that. That concept of accessibility anywhere was not allowed here. It's all about the storage and not taking up your own storage space. And there shouldn't be anything about phones anyway, because you're asked to reference tablet computers. The thing about tablet computers is they are accessible anywhere. The whole point of them is that you can take them wherever you want to. So kind of redundant to say accessible anywhere because you're not using a laptop. It's accessible anywhere anyway. Even if you had local installed software on the computer, that would be accessible anywhere because you can use that anywhere. And with the hosted applications, you do need to have internet access. So that is actually incorrect to say that it is accessible anywhere. 2G. Explain one advantage of using locally installed applications. They're already installed and it can work without the internet. You can work anywhere without the internet. Did that gain marks? Yeah, that gained 2 marks. Work anywhere without internet was gaining marks there because you don't need to have the internet. A good range of correct responses was seen, although there were a few candidates who declined to respond. Of those who failed to gain marks, responses were often referred to cost, security, lack of viruses. It isn't any cheaper locally installed. In fact, it's probably more expensive. Security isn't really enough. Lack of viruses isn't really enough because you should have antivirus software anywhere. Using hosted applications doesn't really give you viruses. Opening dodgy emails with dodgy attachments is what gives you viruses, not hosted applications, so it's not really applicable there. Question 3. Now you notice that would go straight into 3B. Now the reason for this is the examiner reports kind of highlights questions that a lot of students got wrong. So maybe a lot of students got question 3A right, so they didn't really need to write anything about that. Now, the health monitor uses Bluetooth to transfer data to the smartwatch. Explain why Bluetooth rather than infrared is used for this transfer. Infrared cannot pass through objects. Think about if you're trying to change the TV channel using your remote and someone is stood in front of you. It's impossible to do that because it cannot pass through a person. It cannot pass through objects. So infrared cannot pass through, for example, clothing or bags. Bluetooth doing it, I think that says easier there. Yeah, Bluetooth can do that. So infrared cannot pass through objects, and that's what gains the marks there. So Bluetooth is used because that is not applicable. Bluetooth does not lead line of sight, whereas infrared does. 3B2. Give 2 factors that might affect the speed of the transfer. Bandwidth. So the narrower the bandwidth, the slower the transfer. Distance between 2 devices. This gains the marks here. Now, marks are often not awarded for responses that gave generic answers to referring to stronger connection or comment on the size of the file. It doesn't really matter the size of the file. It's not going to speed it up anymore. Just take you a bit longer, but it's not going to make the speed of the transfer any quicker if the file is bigger. If it's going at, say, 10 gigabits per second, no matter how big the file is, it's going to be 10 gigabits per second, whether it's a small file or it's a large file. 3C. Data needs to be encrypted when it's transferred. Describe how encryption keeps data secure. Encryption scrambles the data. It doesn't hide it, doesn't kind of lock it behind a password, it scrambles it. And the only way to unscramble it is to have a key to be able to do that. So if it's intercepted and you don't have the key, you can't unscramble the data, you can't read it. 3D. Run smartwatch use GPS to monitor its location. Give 2 pieces of information that can be calculated using GPS data. We're looking at its location. The minutes were taken to reach the location. So estimated time of arrival. Common responses that gain marks including time taken to reach destination. Steps taken to reach destination and quickest route. Many candidates failed to gain marks because they responded with a reference to calculating their location or location of the device. Okay? I don't know why they wrote that. Again, read the question. You're already given its location. You already know about its location. We don't want to know that. That's just repeating the question. Please, exam tip here, please read the question carefully. And if it says something like this, we don't want to know about the location. We want to know about location he's heading towards and the time it may take to reach that destination. Not his location, because you're already given that piece of information in the question. You don't need to repeat it. 3E. Some social networking services use GPS data. Describe how the use of GPS data places users at risk. It makes so anybody could know where you are. This could lead to abduction, etc. It's not really a great answer to that, but it did gain 2 marks. Anybody can know where you are. Could lead to a potentially difficult situation where people know where you are. It kind of answers a question. Kind of looks a little bit kind of sloppy writing, lead to abduction, etc. Kind of tidy that up a bit myself, but and again that gained the 2 marks, so that's okay. Candidates gain 4 marks for this question by showing understanding how a location is shared and what the consequences could be. Many candidates gain a mark for showing understanding the GPS would share location, but the second mark was sometimes a repeat of the question, simply mentioning risk. You know where you are, which puts you at risk because other internet users could find out where you are and monitor your location, track your location, which could lead to them potentially coming to find you. Question F. The health monitor stores 4 megabytes, that's megabytes, not megabytes, 1024 remember, of data. Construct an expression to show how many bits there are in 4 megabytes. It's 1024. Right, let's unpack this. There's quite a lot to understand here, so we're going to unpack it. 3 marks. So, 4 times 1024. Now, student didn't really need to do the calculation there, and I'm not even sure how you do the calculation without a calculator, unless you're pretty good at these things. I couldn't do that personally. You just need to write 4 times 1024. Okay? Now, we want to find the bits, so we're starting off with 4 megabytes. So multiply it by 1024, which gives us 4096 kilobytes. Okay, don't forget it goes bits, bytes, kilobytes, megabytes. Then we need to multiply it by 1024 again to get us down to bytes. Again, we don't really need to have the answer in there. You just asked to construct an expression only. Then to get it into bits, there are 8 bits in a byte. We multiply it by 8. And simply writing all of these, so just to highlight it, without the answers, gain the marks. Now let's unpack what the examiner had to say about this. There's some confusion from candidates between megabytes and megabytes. As this is the first sitting of the paper, the candidates were awarded marks for responses referring to megabytes, 1000 rather than megabytes, 1024. Listen carefully. Centres are advised that in future series this will not be the case. Please ensure candidates are prepared for the assessment of the most recent version of the specification, which can be downloaded from the Pearson website. And what that means is, it is megabytes, not megabytes. So, for the 2021 onwards exam series, it has to be megabytes, kilobytes, and not kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes, etc. It has to be 1024, not 1000. It cannot be rounded down. That isn't as tricky as it sounds because you don't actually have to do the calculation. You only have to write the expression, not actually do the calculation. And another exam tip, please don't spend time doing the calculation. It is a complete waste of your time. You're not going to gain any extra marks. So this student here who did the calculation didn't gain any marks for that there. 3G. Rowan's purchased his smartwatch online. Describe 2 ways in which the internet can impact positively on companies that sell goods. Well, it's a massive impact on that. And the student have written more sales. So there'd be places in which consumers could not access the shop. So rather than a bricks and mortar shop, they're accessing an online shop because they might not even live in the same country as the shop. And so they can still make a sale even though they don't live in the same country. Less costs on maintaining physical stores as they can run their goods business online. So they don't actually need to have a shop. Can access anywhere with the internet on connection available. Now that is a pretty good answer that the student's written there. And yeah, I can completely see why they gained 4 marks for that. It's a really great answer there. Now, let's look at what the examiner has to say. Many candidates gained marks for this question. Responses relating to advertising through social media were customer benefits and global access to global workforce were also described. Where candidates failed to gain marks, it was often for responses that incorrectly referred to profit. Okay, yes, reaching a bigger audience is going to affect profit and increase sales, but if that's kind of the only focus of your answer, then that isn't going to gain you any marks. And that completes question 3. Question 4. Rowan searches online for local sporting events. Rowan evaluates the fitness for purpose of the search results. Complete this table to show how each property can negatively affect the fitness for purpose of the information. Now here's the table, and I've got the property and the negative effect there. And the property is bias, age, and reliability. Now, this student only got 2 marks for this question because they got the age bit wrong. They got the bias bit wrong, which is saying it's leaning to sort of certain viewpoints, one-sided, which is absolutely correct. Not looking at all possibilities, but leaning to sort of being too one-sided, and that's exactly what bias is. Reliability, is the information verifiable? Can you double check it? Can you cross check it with other websites? Does it appear to be the same thing? Is it consistent? Then you know that it is reliable. But the age. Now age is talking about the age of the information, the age of the web page. Bearing in mind, some web pages out there on the internet are 20, 25 years old. And so you need to be, if you're finding information, can you see that is up to date? Is it a few years old? It's out of date. Can you check the date of it? Has it been updated recently? If not, then it's probably not a really good source of information. So what we're saying here is make sure that you really read the question, you understand what they're asking. Because this student lost marks by assuming that age was the age of the demographic, not the age of the web page. 4b. Explain why Rowan must consider his use of keywords when using a search engine. Search engine analyzes matching keywords to keywords related to websites. By use of correct keywords and syntaxes, Rowan can increase his chance of finding more relevant websites. This gained both marks as it mentioned matching keywords to websites. That's what it does. You type in your keywords into the search engine, and those keywords are matched against the database of web pages. And when there's a match, then the web pages are brought up to for your attention in your search results. Responses often mention the need to consider keywords, but frequently did not refer to the relevance of keywords. For relevant, accurate was often seen. Irrelevant, wrong was frequently offered. Okay, it's got nothing to do with that. It's just matching keywords. Now, there may be some irrelevant pages in there, but the keywords have matched. It's not checking if the information is that the web pages are relevant or accurate. It's just checking that they match the keyword. They could be relevant or accurate or not. That's not what it's checking. That's not what a search engine is doing. So just be clear about that. 4c. Zara enters the same search term as Rowan but receives different results. Why does she receive different results? There's a number of factors there. Filters are used, hidden by the browser, depend on the type of browser used. Some browsers, political, religious reasons, in some countries, censor some content. Both marks there. So there is some examples of censoring in different countries. Different browsers will bring up different results. Different search engines will bring different results. Candidates frequently mentioned entering different keywords even though the question stated that Zara had entered the same term. So it's got nothing to do with entering different keywords. Again, this is an example of not really understanding the question, not really reading the question properly. So marks were lost, sadly, because the students really didn't understand what the question was exactly asking them. And if that's the case, if you don't understand what the question is asking you, and just take a moment, just take a step back, perhaps do the next question and come back to it, or perhaps just make some notes on it. But make sure you clearly understand what the question is asking you to do and what the response should be. For E, describe how MAC addresses can be used to prevent access to networks. Well, MAC addresses are unique to every device and cannot be changed, correct. The devices can be identified on a network through their MAC addresses and can be restricted to access. Firewalls can be used to prevent certain MAC addresses from joining entering the network. The first mark for this response was gained from MAC addresses are unique to every device. 1 mark. Identified is not enough for checked and restrained access. A repeat of this question. Second mark was awarded for firewalls can be used. So this student didn't get the full set of marks there. They only got 2 marks for this response. The MAC addresses can be given restricted access. So what the results plus is saying is identified is not enough for checked and restrict access as a repeat of the question. So what the examiner wanted to see there was that you had written down a process of the MAC address being checked, perhaps against a list of allowed MAC addresses or disallowed MAC addresses, so that you can restrict internet access, for example, and they needed to explain that in a bit more detail, which they didn't. Let's look at the examiner report. Many candidates gave marks for stating that MAC addresses are unique, but responses did not always mention that the firewall checks addresses against whitelists and blacklists. So that's what the MAC address is doing there. So you can have a whitelist and a blacklist of allowed and disallowed MAC addresses. For F, an 8-mark question. Analyze how the use of cloud-based services has impacted on the gap between the information rich and the information poor. Now, this student didn't get full marks for this answer, and when we read through it, we're going to analyze why. The information rich are based in developed countries which have the money to build research and facilitate information to citizens, while developing countries lack the time and priority for it, instead focusing on healthcare and raw materials, hence the gap. Yep, it's absolutely correct. The innovation of the internet in developed countries has led to cloud-based services where users can access the information they don't want at any time of the day, anywhere in reach of the network. People are able to get educated more early, can earn high marks on tests, develop their skills, and therefore get high spots on jobs, like working at Google headquarters. The question goes on. All the information poor may have no access to the internet. They'll not be able to get the free, cheap education and may stay in the same condition for the rest of their lives, while the information rich get the privilege to prove themselves and move forward. This is called digital divide. Yep, digital divide gap is only going to get wider by day as there are constant advancements in technology, the ability to update, discuss in terms of shared data. Not sure I'd have written that last sentence. I'm not sure. Hopefully it won't get wider by the day. Hopefully it will narrow. But this response provides elements of knowledge about the use of cloud-based services given at the end of the response. There are links between the causes of the gap and the services, but not on how the services impact the gap. So it's not saying on how the services can impact the gap. So, for example, the lack of access to the internet, how that impacts the gap. Cannot get access to information, cannot get access to cheaper deals, things like that. Cannot find information. There is therefore no mention of the impact of the services on the widening or narrow gap, so this does not meet the level 3 descriptor. So it hasn't said how the impact of the digital divide impacts the gap in knowledge, the gap in gaining knowledge. It meets the descriptor for the top of level 2 and is awarded 5 marks. Let's have a look at what the examiner says. Candidates failed to gain marks for the higher mark band where they listed what the services can do and the cause of the gap rather than the impact of the gap. So what is the impact of the gap? The impact of the gap is cannot access information, cannot get the best deals online that you can online, cannot use certain tools, cannot get access to education that you can with the internet. So that is the impact of the gap of the digital divide. Now for a question like this, it's 8 marks. You need to, if it says the impact and the impact is highlighted in bold, you must make sure you refer to the impact in your answer. Otherwise you're going to limit yourself to a lower mark band, no matter how much you wrote. And you saw how much this candidate wrote. They wrote loads. He's probably spent about half an hour maybe on this question, on this answer. Maybe 15 minutes, possibly half an hour on this answer. And they thought they'd done really well. They've written loads. But they only gained 5 marks for it, not the top mark band. They limited themselves because they didn't write about the impact of the gap. Now you can see that very clearly highlighted in bold. If that's highlighted in bold, that's what they want to see in your answer. You must do that. You must talk about the impact if it's in bold there. Okay, now that completes question 4. Let's now move on to question 5, the final question. Question 5, quite a nice question here, look, but one, as we'll see, that's quite easy to get wrong. James teaches in a school that uses a local area network and a wide area network. Give one example of a wide area network. You need to write the internet. Okay, nothing else. Some students write World Wide Web. That isn't a network. The network is the internet. World Wide Web pages, the web pages that use the internet, that are on the internet. You need to understand the difference between the two. The network is the internet. The World Wide Web pages, World Wide Web, are the web pages. I don't know why anyone would write Wi-Fi. Clearly they weren't watching my videos. They weren't revising. 5b. Some learners have accessibility needs. Complete the table to describe how 2 peripheral devices designed specifically for accessibility could improve the learning of people with accessibility needs. So you need to come up with 2 examples. And the student has come up with a reading pen and a computer. Computer is a bit generic. Perhaps we could narrow that down to perhaps saying maybe speakers, or perhaps a microphone to dictate commands. Let's see their answers. They only got 2 marks for this. Why? Well, you get the other marks from this column here, how it supports accessibility needs. If someone can't read very well, then they have a pen which helps them to read the text to them. Now, kind of looking at the response there from the examiner, the second part of the response, typical of a candidate that was too generic and focused on the requirement of the question, which is emboldened to ensure candidates were aware of what they should answer in the context. Specifically, now I think for 2 marks, this top one there, number 1, that gained 2 marks. But the bottom one, computer, is too generic. It's not specific. And the examiner report said it needs to be specific. So for someone that can't write, the need to, so the teacher can understand the student's work. It's not really specific there, okay? Perhaps you could have narrowed that down and said someone with dyslexia, poor handwriting, poor eyesight cannot write. Someone with poor eyesight can dictate their assignment into the computer, which will type it for them, and that will help them access this, perhaps, but it wasn't being specific there, really. Few candidates gain mark from this question. Common correct responses related to Braille keyboards. Many candidates provided responses related to general peripherals, such as mice, speakers, and microphones, therefore limiting access to marks. Okay, all computers have mice, all computers have speakers, lots of computers have microphones. If you were too generic there, you needed to really narrow that down. So make sure, again, the bold writing. 2, specifically, the exam is pointing you to what you need to do to gain the marks there. So column 1 is to. Column 2 is specifically. You need to be specific. Question C. Describe 2 benefits to teachers of using a local area network. Shared hardware, central management. Now, this student looks like they got full marks for that. Using a LAN helps prevents them from buying hardware devices like printers for each and every computer. It's not really a benefit to the teacher, maybe. That's more a benefit to the school. I think more of a benefit to the teacher would be shared hardware. You could say that the teacher can monitor and control who prints and who doesn't print. So if everyone's got a printer next to them, they might be tempted to print out rubbish all the time and print out documents that don't need to be printed and waste time on that. Having a central printer allows the teacher to monitor that and to control who gets to print and who doesn't, and what they get to print, perhaps. But it's saved money. Again, I'd prefer to see that referring to the teacher there. And as I said in many, many videos, please refer to the actual question and the context and the person in the question, which is, in this case, is a teacher. Central management, all backup and storage are managed on a central point. For example, when backing up the document can only be backed up from the central server instead of during every individual computer. Now, how is that useful to a teacher? Because if a student loses their work, there's always a backup of it. I would prefer to see in this response, for me, link back to the teacher. This kind of generic, kind of any, could refer to anyone, any kind of party in this. But the student got 4 marks, so fair enough. But personally, I prefer that to refer to the actual context and the teacher. 5D. One type of backup procedure in the school that could use is incremental backup. State one other type of backup procedure the school could use to secure its data. We've got differential backup there, which gained the student's mark. Common errors including mentioning alternative backup media rather than processors. Reference to cloud backup or repeating incremental, because that's already in the question there, so you don't need to repeat that. You need to understand different backup methods, differential, incremental, etc. Make sure you understand that. So perhaps some research into that would have been useful. It's only 1 mark, but to me, every mark is important. 5E. Acceptable use policy. Okay. This is a 2-mark response, and there's a couple of exam tips which we'll go through in a minute. Acceptable use policy shows users what they can and cannot do on a network. Yep, absolutely correct. It shows what could happen if the user breaks the policy. Yep, absolutely correct, and how it may be enforced. It also, I'm not able to read that. It also gains a company proof that if you break the policy, previously agreed not to. Okay. Why didn't the student gain 3 marks for that? Well, yeah, absolutely correct. It shows what you can and cannot do on the network and what the terms and conditions are and what can happen if you break those rules. Absolutely. Perhaps we might have explained a bit further after what the consequences would have been, gone into a bit more detail there. Study the policies available in your centre so that candidates can relate their responses to a realistic and tangible document. So if you break the rules, what's going to happen? What are the rules? What's going to happen if you break the rules? So maybe examples there would be really, really useful. Perhaps you need to speak to your teacher and find that information out. Candidates did not demonstrate a sound understanding of the nature of acceptable use policies. Common incorrect responses included those related to data protection, no, copyright, misuse of equipment, and software from a supplier's point of view. It's got nothing to do with that. When you sign on to your school computer, you agree to the acceptable use policy. If you're not sure what that is, find that out. So, for example, common policies would say, you're not allowed to use the internet, you're not allowed to download things, not allowed to use the internet to watch videos that you're not supposed to do, not supposed to play games, not supposed to be abusive to one another, etc. And though breaking these rules could lead you to be banned for a certain amount of time. And maybe parents need to come in and speak to you about that. So that's examples that could have been quoted there. F. Learners use communication software. Describe the purpose of communication software. 2 marks. Communication software is software designed particularly to communicate, share ideas, data, I'm sure that's data, files to other individuals. Both marks were gained in response for exchange and files. So sharing files, data, etc. Many responses related to sharing files, sharing information. Candidates sometimes fail to gain a mark as they use to communicate as a verb in their response. Communication software allows you to share files, data, information, etc. And in terms of communication software, we're talking about emails, we're talking about messaging, even talking about functions of VLEs, for example. Right, last question. I've kind of covered this before in a previous video, but let's go through it again. Discuss the impact of VLEs on learners. 8 marks. Okay, a big chunk of marks. Now, why is 8 marks important? Well, 8 marks is going to mean the difference between 2 grade boundaries. It's as simple as that. So you need to get 8 marks. Now, virtual learning environment is a great tool to help learners throughout their studies. It gives access to a big span of functions such as, and then they've listed the function here. I'm not going to read out everything there because you can see that in front of you, but giving the learners access to their network or tasks online gives the learners opportunities to cooperate. They can collaborate on tasks. VLE increases control between the teacher and the contact between the teacher and the student. Some negatives here. Makes them reluctant to work with paper tasks without using the internet. Can be too reliant on the internet. I can understand that. Continuous use of computer, health and safety issues, etc. In conclusion, I'll say that the VLE has a positive impact on learners as it gives access to loads of learning materials as well as increases the communication between learners and teachers. The student gained 7 marks due to lack of clear linkage to the scenario. Now, again, as I've talked about before in a previous video, the scenario is the school teacher, and you need to refer back to the school teacher, so you need to make that specific in the answer. So again, a common theme here is not referring to the question, not referring to the context of the question, and missing out some marks there. And that's really, really important in your exam. Many students fail to do that. Many students failed to understand what a VLE was and wrote about virtual reality and simulations. So that completes question 5. That completes the paper. So now we'll just sum up what we've learned from this. Now, the most important part of this video, the paper summary. This is the advice from the Chief Examiner to students taking exams in the future. Based on their performance in this paper, candidates are offered the following advice. Develop the good practice of expanding and explaining answers using examples and reasons where more than a simple statement or list is required. So if you can see that the question is a 2 mark or a 4 mark, then make sure you've written enough to justify 2 marks or 4 marks. So not just a point, you've actually explained it there as well. You can see if you've written enough. You can see if you've written a sentence or just a point. And that's going to gain you the 2 marks or the 4 marks in there. Respond with the context of the question in mind. A common theme here. Common theme that is running through this. Students didn't read the context and respond with the context in mind. If the context is a teacher who has a VLE, then you need to think about the teacher, think about the needs of the teacher and their students and the use of the VLE. To always, always, always make a note of the context. Write notes by the question if you need to help you remember, but you must refer to the context. Do not repeat responses where more than one example reason is required. So if you just ask for one example and one reason, you don't write any more than that. So you haven't got time. You've got an hour and a half in this paper. That's all you need to write. Identify keywords and command words in the question to ensure responses reflect what the question asks you to do. Maybe take the time to list from the question the keywords that you can pick out. if you need help with this, I have got a link in the description, to the keywords. Now, I can link that to you. There's keywords for use in this paper, for use in the exam. You must make sure you understand them and that you use them in any response that you give. When required to give one other example reason, ensure that the response is discrete from the example reason. What that is saying is, make sure your response is discrete from the reason that you've given. So, if you asked to give 2 examples, 2 reasons for each example, that they look like 2 different examples and they're not the same. You're not just repeating the first one. Security, for example, and you're doing 2 different versions of security. Practice a range of extended questions, not just balanced arguments. Take the time. Take plenty of 8-mark questions and look at both sides of the argument. Perhaps decide on which side of the fence you sit and make a reason for that. Make a case for that. Provide point, evidence, explain. We've looked at an 8-mark question in this paper. Students didn't get 8 marks because they didn't provide a balanced argument. They didn't explain. They didn't provide they made the point. They may have provided the evidence, but they didn't explain it. So they limited themselves to maybe mark band 1 and mark band 2, so maximum of 5 marks out of the 8. Allocate time to plan responses to extended questions. So an hour and a half, you should be able to have some paper and plan out your answer to the 8-mark question. So rather than just dive in and start writing, maybe mind map it if that's your thing. Maybe list some points if you prefer that way. But take the time to do that rather than jumping straight in and writing a response. So perhaps at the start of the exam, take the time to plan out how each question and how much time you're going to allocate to each question. And make sure you've got enough time for the 8-mark question. You've got enough time to plan. So at least a few minutes extra to plan your response. Now, make a note of those carefully. Thank you very much for watching this video. It's very lengthy, but I hope it's helped you. If it has helped you, please consider liking and subscribing. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye-bye.